Statistics from the annual crime reports from the last 5 years show that domestic violence is among the top 3 crimes reported at police stations across the country after theft and common assault. In 2023, 3,243 men were victims of domestic violence. 2022 had 3,728 men, while 2021 had 3,103 men as victims of domestic violence. In 2020, 3,408 men were victims, and in 2019, 2,908 men were victims, and 2018 had 2,873 men as victims of domestic violence. William Mazinga looks world-weary, jaded, worn down. Clearly, talking about his domestic ordeal still traumatizes him. For 2 years, Mazinga, who owns a real estate company, suffered emotional and physical abuse at the hands of his wife.
This is someone I called every day, telling her about work. It got to a point where she would pick the calls and shout at me.
The couple had been living in marital bliss for 6 years. However, everything shattered when he brought a proposal to sell off their plot of land.
She accused me of having another wife, saying that was the reason I wanted to sell the land.
At first, his wife tortured him. Whenever he would come home late, she wouldn't open the door, leaving him to shiver in the cold until morning.
She starved me, yet I was the breadwinner. She forbade our children from visiting their grandparents. I had no control over the children.
Increasingly, more men are speaking out about the intimate partner violence their peers are being subjected to. This begs the question, is the number of male victims rising, or is the vice coming out because of more awareness campaigns? Mercy Munduru, a feminist lawyer, says the goal should be to eliminate domestic violence as opposed to debating who is more affected by the vice.
When violence is being portrayed on both ends, there is a more balanced debate, and we begin to question violence as a vice, not just who it is, perpetrated against.
Daniel Angwalia, the managing partner of Angwalia, Busiku and Company Advocates, says intimate partner violence against men is fraught with stereotypes, hence the silence that shrouds it.
The masculinity, the falsehood that as a man, and in the event that I'm beaten or harassed by my wife, I shouldn't talk. I personally don't believe so much in these statistics on whether more cases are being reported, because the reason why the cases are not being reported is still there.
Mazinga suffered psychological abuse in silence, and then his wife started beating him.
One day I returned home at 10 p.m. When I explained that I was coming from work, she said no one works that late. Then she beat me and tore off my clothes. Sadly, our children were watching.
In a patriarchal society like the one we live in, the first question responders ask the male victim is why he does not fight back.
I didn't want to annoy the children. If I had fought back, I would be in jail.
Many have blamed the highly successful women's rights movement for painting men as aggressors. They argue that as a result, some emancipated women have been turned into abusers.
I have the women's movement to thank. I have the feminist movement to thank for the fact that people are more aware about violence. Unfortunately, many times when it's women who are victims to violence, people try to downplay it by, creating narratives that paint the victims most times in bad light.
Ali Malay, a counseling psychologist, says despite the stereotype that only women, girls, and juvenile boys are victims, domestic violence against men is growing. However, men do not report the vice. It is just discovered during family counseling sessions.
They are really struggling because the few cases that normally come, they report about issues of torture around sexuality, about property possession, issuing threats over dignity of the men on the side of the in-laws.
After enduring 2 years of abuse, Mazinga finally walked out of his marriage with only the clothes on his back. He left everything behind, including his 4 children and land titles. Angwalia says men who take the legal path are too traumatized to state the actual reason why they want to divorce their wives.
So you come out and tell, no, look here, if we are to go to court, we must have a reason. We have to explain to court why you want a divorce. It is either adultery, cruelty, or desertion. And then you break down the cruelty aspect. That cruelty does not necessarily involve only physical beating. There's also the emotional aspect. And then you see the gentleman adjusting.
Mazinga was traumatized by the loss of his marriage and stigmatized by his peers for allowing his wife to see his vulnerability.
When you are with your peers, you don't feel man enough. They laugh, saying I couldn't rule my home. They say I am not a man.
Mazinga found refuge with Men's Forum Against Domestic Violence Uganda, an organization that fights domestic violence through promoting male involvement in families. He now takes care of his family from a distance, paying their rent and the children's school fees. He only visits his children when they are at school.
Violence is a product of an oppressive system, that is the patriarchal system, that we are all subject to, both men and women. But this system, however, places more power in the hands of men as it gives men privileges over women.
The silence might be loud, the stereotypes might have hardened, and the stigma is paralyzing. However, statistics don't lie. The reality is that increasing cases of domestic violence against men are being registered. GILLIAN NANTUME, NTV, Weekend Edition.